everyone, and welcome to this episode of Waynesboro at Work, a podcast where we interview entrepreneurs and business leaders in the Waynesboro area to learn more about the origin stories of their business, their passion for their work, and a little bit of everything in between. So I am really thrilled to be joined today by Rob Seal, who is the owner of Waynesboro Music. Rob, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I think we have some context clues, right, in the name of the business. But for people that don't know or aren't familiar, what is Waynesboro Music all about?
Yeah, we're a new retail store in Waynesboro. We just opened in August, and I think August the 5th was our first day. We
Okay.
sell musical instruments. We teach lessons. We do some sort of setup and kind of minor repair work on instruments, on certain instruments anyway. We run occasional events. We'll have workshops and bluegrass jams. I would say, as far as music stores go, we are definitely more oriented toward guitars, mandolins, and banjos and stringed instruments than other stuff right now, but we hope to grow over time.
Okay, awesome. So if anybody is into those kinds of instruments, they can definitely come there. Sounds like not just get the instruments, but also get lessons as well.
Yeah, that's right. We've only just started. We've got about 20 students in the store right now.
Nice.
We teach on banjo, on mandolin, on guitar at all levels and styles. And I think we've got 4 teachers, so we're really pleased with that part.
Amazing. So this is my favorite question of the whole podcast, which is where did your passion for this kind of work come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the first time I worked in a music store, like a retail music store environment, was back in high school in the 90s. I grew up in Rockingham County, and I worked for a summer at Hayden Music, which was in the Valley Mall. And then after that, when I was in high school and college, that was a sort of a common side job for me, even early into the professional part of my career after graduation. I think I taught or worked at 4 or 5 different stores and really liked it, but always thought of it as kind of like a fun thing I do when I'm young, kind of on the side.
Yeah.
As my wife and I got married, I worked a different career that was more associated with my kind of like experience in school. I was a newspaper reporter and editor for about 5 years.
Wow.
Right after graduating, a couple of small papers in Virginia, and then worked at the University of Virginia for 15 years, which I really liked and is a great place to work. I know a lot of people in Waynesboro drive over the mountain every day.
You're right.
Charlottesville for work. I definitely had a lot of company up there on Afton. But yeah, it's always been in the back of our minds, my wife and I, and she's the co-owner of Waynesboro Music, and we had always kind of daydreamed a little bit about like opening some sort of a store or opening a retail operation. And because I had done some work in that industry before, and music's always been a big part of my life, always seemed like a thing that was kind of just over the next hill. So
Yes.
I think coming out of the pandemic, we thought, well, are we going to have energy for this in 20 years? Are we going to still want to do it in 20 years? So kind of decided to just take a chance and roll the dice.
Nice. So going even further back, when did you start first playing musical instruments? Like, how did you get interested?
Yeah, I've had a lot of music in my family, and it's always been a part of my life, but kind of in different ways at different phases. So growing up, my mom, still good piano player, very involved in her church choir and music in Harrisonburg. But for me, it started out with guitar lessons. I was probably 5 or 6. I was pretty
Okay.
young to start taking guitar, and I had like a laminated like guitar with a cowboy on it that probably cost a couple dollars,
Yeah.
came in like a cardboard box. Uh, and it was good instrument to learn on. I took lessons from in Dayton from Mary Jane Harmon, who was a wonderful person to learn music from when I was a little kid. She's long gone now. And then as I got off in toward high school, there was actually a really good piano teacher who was conservatory trained herself and was like a big deal classical pianist. I didn't really realize it at the time.
Hmm.
Her name was Nancy Hackman. She was in Harrisonburg, and she taught both my brother and I piano and guitar. And that got me right up to the point probably where I wanted to kind of rebel against it a little bit and was no longer very interested in like showing up every week and,
Yes.
learning, doing those things. So I was in like the obligatory bad kind of like metal band, that one does. It was actually a lot of fun. They were older than me, these guys. They were all just out of the Navy, and I was still like a senior in high school, junior in high school, and they let me kind of hang around and play music with them and do a couple local.
Nice.
That was a lot of fun. Two of the biggest musical influences in my life for sure are my granddad and my brother.
Mm.
My
Okay.
grandfather from Southwest Virginia in Russell County. We would go down there a lot when I was a kid. We'd go down for a week or two in the summers. My mom would drop me off, and my brother and I. And we'd go every Christmas. We'd go kind of, we weren't always down there, but we were down there enough that it felt normal to be there. Uh,
Right.
and my granddad was real big into, you know, one of the best things about music, I think, and bluegrass and other types of music, or in any kind of music, really, is he just loved to play in the living room and play with other people. He had kind of picking buddies, and so if you hung out with him, you're driving to a store, to a jam, to to his buddy's house. You're going to the church that they're going to play at. You're going to like the practice rehearsal that they're going to do for his gospel group.
Yeah.
In my early 20s, my brother and I got to go down, and we'd sort of show up. He was living in Tennessee and I was living in Virginia, and we'd sort of show up at a recording studio in Castlewood, Virginia, and learn like 10 or 12 songs that my granddad had put together, sort of on the fly, to like record them right then for like CDs that they would pay for themselves and put out. And
Yeah.
it was like it was kind of medium and down tempo, very vocal focused, sort of bluegrass gospel style, right? So
Hmm.
all the hard part was in the singing, which we didn't have to do. Got to like figure out all the instrumental parts, and I played mandolin, and my brother would play dobro, and we roll the dice to see who played the bass. And it was a really good part of the musical education. It's a long wind up to say that like I had a lot of bluegrass exposure as a kid, as a small kid, and then
Okay.
kind of no interest in that at all for like most of my sort of teenage years. But in college, you get interested in new things again, and my buddies and I started listening to bluegrass bands and going to see it live sometimes. And I remembered that kind of connection, and it felt sort of like home to me. So when I graduated, moved to Culpeper for my first newspaper job. I took a ton of music lessons at Culpeper Music and started going to jams and learned the banjo and tried to learn the mandolin, and took some ill-fated fiddle lessons, and I tried to learn the repertoire for bluegrass stuff. So um, you know, uh, throughout my adult life, it was kind of like a small part of my life then too. Even working other jobs, I'd go play a wedding with a buddy, or we'd go play at Shenandoah Pizza in Stanton, or at
Yeah.
the Stone Soup Books in Waynesboro. We were
Mhm.
never like big names that anyone would ever recognize. It was more of the like couple guys, playing mandolin and guitar in the corner type of things.
Right.
It was always kind of a thing that was going on for most of my life. So when the discussions about whether or not to open a music store started, that was the kind of frame of reference I had. I should talk about my brother too, because I talk about him all the time, especially in the store. Unbelievably good guitar player, Mike Seal. He's in the Jerry Douglas band in Nashville. He's
Nice.
not had to have like a normal job, quote unquote normal job. He's always been a professional musician. Him and his
Wow.
wife are both musicians. They work really hard, and are kind of part of the larger musical community in Nashville, and have been able to do it for a living, which is great. So
Yes.
growing up as a kid, I had this kind of like unrealistic expectation of what like normal musical ability was, which I think
Uh-huh.
I fall very much in the normal musical ability part of the spectrum, and Mike, my brother, is like a bit of an outlier on the edge of that. So it always threw me off a little bit. I was like, well, most people have perfect pitch, and yeah, you should be able to just hear it and play it back and say what note that is. That's a thing that's normal, and it is
Right.
definitely not normal for all of you out there in similar situations.
Yes. So, I think a lot of people will listen to this episode based off of the fact of like, oh, it's Waynesboro music, and they'll be like music lovers or maybe play instruments themselves. But I'm really hoping that some people will listen in that maybe have never played an instrument before and might be, feeling a little bit intimidated. It can be intimidating to walk into a music store. What would you say to those folks, like anybody listening that might be thinking about getting into it and maybe they're an adult and they've just never done it before?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I find myself having versions of that conversation a lot in the store since we
Yeah.
opened, which has really been really a big part of like the privilege of getting to have this store has been getting to talk to people about what they're interested in about music and why do they want to play this instrument and what do they want to
Yeah.
get out of it. And sometimes you do encounter a little bit of a hesitation where people are like, well, I've had a guitar before and I tried some lessons, didn't work out, or I, was interested in it, and I hear like a long litany of things. I don't think that people think of them as excuses, but my mind translates them and just kind of like, well, I'm not sure that's true as soon as I hear it, right? Stuff like
Yeah.
my fingers are too fat, my fingers are too short, my hands are too stubby, my ear is bad, I can't determine pitches. Like there's a lot of people who I think have encountered some resistance or some negative feedback around playing music at some point in their life, and it's you can get deterred by that. It also can be very intimidating to walk into a room and oh my gosh, there's six people and they are just killing it, right? They're just standing around a living room or a music store or whatever, and they're playing really high level. You could be like, oh, that's great. That's I don't want to ruin this. I don't want to participate and like drag it down a level.
Right.
So when people come into the store, when I talk to them and they're like, I'd like to do it, but my time's a little short and I just don't think I have a lot of aptitude. I usually am, saying to them some version of, it's not a thing that has like a starting time and an ending time when you have a relationship
Yes.
with music, right? It kind of has a start because that's when you first start doing it, but we're all hearing music our whole lives. We have
Yes.
tastes, we have preferences. It carries cultural information for us, the music that we like. You can go through a phase of one thing and get into another thing. And, I don't know a ton about like the neurology of like what happens in the brain when we make music, but there's a great book by a guy named Oliver Sacks called Musicophilia that goes
Okay.
into that a little bit. And I feel I don't want to get too far out on that limb because it's definitely not my area of expertise. But like music's a lot like language, right? We are born
Hmm.
with a natural human propensity for it. The parts of the brain that light up when we're really involved in music making or music listening are our language centers.
Yes.
We're it's a way that we communicate. It's just a sort
Hmm.
of slightly different type of communication. And so no one is without the ability ingrained and built in with all of us to like receive and participate in communication, right? Like we do it all day long. So it's like is our superpower as a species, right?
Yes.
We're super communicative. And music is as natural as that. It's as natural as like breathing in and out. But it is also a thing that has some craft and skill to it that you have to
Mm.
develop. And literally no one gets that for free right off the top. Like there's some people like my brother, like maybe your friend or somebody's, roommate that is like a natural athlete in high school or in, when you're young, like obvious that this person has got some natural gifts in this area. They're running all over the field. They're playing notes all over the fingerboard. They're like thriving, right? Those people are not this like sole custodians of music. They're outliers. They're the like
Mm.
one in a thousand who just gets an extra double dose of like the natural amount of talent. But you don't need that to have a successful relationship with music. The most
Right.
important things that you can do are just a little bit of want to, right? Like
Yes.
you can't just drag somebody into it kicking and screaming. Like you got to want it for yourself some. And then
Right.
some patience and some like self-forgiveness in the early sucky days, excuse my language, when
Yes.
your fingers hurt if you're playing guitar and you got big calluses and you're not quite sure what to practice and how come this is so easy for so and so but it's so hard for me, and how come when my teacher plays it this way they can do it and I can't. I think
Right.
what it really comes down to in those stages is if you're patient, if you don't put undue pressure on yourself to achieve arbitrary things at an arbitrary speed, but you have to be a little bit diligent and intentional and getting better. It's
Yes.
practice hours. The everybody at a certain period of time, I'll date myself a little bit. I think that was
Mhm.
common to reference this Malcolm Gladwell book where he talked about the 10,000 hour expertise,
Yes.
right? Like that if you get 10,000 reps in on something, and that's a bit of a, I don't know about the, accuracy of that number, but let's just say that it does take 10,000 hours for true mastery, like deep, deep mastery. It's
Hmm.
crazy to make a judgment about your own musical ability before you even get to hour one. You know what I mean?
Yes.
On your practice
Yes.
time to like write it off and be like, not for me. I love listening to it, but I can't do it. It's like, no, absolutely not. Go ahead and
Yes.
go log that first 10 hours of practice, this first week or whatever, or, 5. When
Right.
students come in, one of the conversations we talk about in those first lessons, whether it's me or one of the other teachers, is, um, you know, practice time as a time when you like are trying to get better at something and you're working on something that a teacher showed you or that you learned yourself. Self-taught can be a bit of a fib in terms of what it evokes to people too, because that
Yes.
doesn't didn't work. You did work if you're self-taught, right? Like you're listening to records, you're listening to players, you're breaking it down yourself. You just, you're your own guide. And I think that's
Right.
valid. A lot of my favorite musicians in the world, probably most of them, are self-taught. But it doesn't mean no work. That's the lie
Right.
that people who don't play music think, is like they hear self-taught and think no work. It's like, no way, man. That's tons of work to be self-taught.
Yes.
And it's tons of work however you do it. But when you kind of go into that with a sort of mentality that's like, hey, there's music for self-expression and creative self-expression and for participation in social music and all this other stuff. And then there's a slightly different variation of how I use my musical time that's practice, where I'm like trying to get better at something, trying to like make the sound I hear in my head and trying to get my like physical machine, my hands to like do the stuff, that you want.
Yes.
You have to do that a bit. So new students, we say like, hey, 15 minutes, 5 days a week when we're first starting out, plenty.
Right.
That doesn't mean that's
Yes.
all you can play all you want, don't wear your fingers out, don't hurt yourself, but like but be intentional about those blocks of practice early on when you're starting. And I've never met a single person, all the years of doing this, of hanging out with people playing music, of teaching lessons in different capacities, it's like I have not met one yet that can. Everybody can.
Yeah.
And the rewards of that, not to be corny about it, but the rewards of that are deep, because
Oh, yes.
you know when you can shift into a mode in which you're taking a few minutes that day to play music with friends or by yourself. You're taking an instrument out from under the bed, you're going to go play on the porch, the house is empty for a minute, you're going to just sit down at the piano. If that's what you do, you're going to take your mandolin, you're going to go to jam with your friends. Your best friend starts playing upright bass and you start playing banjo, and you're learning it together, and you're texting during the day and being like, did you hear bluegrass album?
Yes.
You're getting excited about the same stuff. That stuff is like, that's the good stuff right there.
Yeah.
It's like the fuel that makes it all worth it. So I think that the things that I like inside of music are not everybody's things. I love the social elements of bluegrass. I love the kind of like go over to somebody's house and play, or meet them at a jam, or hey, you're a stranger but we know 100 songs in common because we're into the same type of things.
Yes.
I love that stuff. Somebody else might be like, the best part for me of music is like when I really dial in on like some super fast thrash with my double bass pedal on my drums, and when I really lock into that beat by Meshuggah and Bleed at the very beginning, that lights
Yeah.
me up. And that's just as valid and just as good, right? It doesn't matter about the
Yes.
flavor. I think that
Right.
the act of kind of like creative self-expression that music offers, and combined with this sort of like intentionality of getting good at something,
Hmm.
like that feeds us too. Just good, not as an objective measure of value, but as of the like, I'm better able to do the thing I set out to do now than I was before.
Yes.
That's all a lot of payoff. So I could talk about that stuff a lot. I think if you don't have a ton of music in your life and you wish you did, you should get some.
Yes. I 100% agree. I think it's like you said, I like what you said about how the favorite parts of it are going to be different for each person, but whatever that specific is, like the reward of that is just so amazing. I mean, for me, it's like very meditative when I sit down at the piano, and it's like, and approaching it with, like you said, not with a lot of pressure or criticism of yourself, but more like curiosity. Like you can enjoy the learning as well as mastering the piece.
Yeah, you totally can. And that comes. It doesn't come right away. And
Yes.
I think that there's a barrier that people have to get through a little bit when you start working on music, whether it's by yourself or with a teacher or whatever. It's like, that first month in, you get a lot of enthusiasm. Maybe I'm 2 months, 3 months in, that enthusiasm starts to maybe wear off a bit. And you're left
Yes.
with this kind of like, oh gosh, practice again, this song again.
Yes.
There's something of value also in just learning how to continue to be productive with your music when you somewhat don't feel like it, because your
Yeah.
initial enthusiasm dose has worn off. But
Yeah.
it's not a slog and it's not painful, but like the experience turns into a rewarding one when you practice, but not right away. Like
Yes.
as an adult playing some piano, I got back into it during the pandemic, but my piano instruction is 30 years in my past, pretty much. Like
Yeah.
the So it's been a long time since like I worked on it actively. And my play repertoire was what it was then. You walk away from it, kind of leave it there,
Yeah.
I got back into a little bit over the early days of the pandemic, and it's just like you said, it was a very different experience than like sitting down to play bluegrass with somebody. It's like, okay, I'm
Right.
gonna try to learn this like kind of hard piece for me. And then I
Yes.
like weeks like trying to learn it. And it is very like a meditative type of experience, um,
Hmm.
and when things are busy and crazy, which they were for all of us, like at that period of time, it was also a nice little slice of the day that you can kind of put some walls around and just,
Yes.
all right, this is the part of the day in which I buck. That
Right.
is all. And I'm going to learn this. Gosh darn it. If I have to like do the right hand for 15 minutes, the left hand
Yeah.
for 15 minutes, and then try to combine them, I'm doing it that way. Whatever. I'm doing it however I can. And,
Yeah.
that was actually really fun. I never did finish learning a couple of those pieces. So they still are haunting me from my like, pile of unfinished tasks in the back of my mind.
That's
Uh,
right.
but yeah, it's great. And I would say too, if you were retired and you're thinking about playing music, do it. If you're 15 and you're thinking about playing music, do it. If you're 37, it's time. If you're
Right.
10 and you like it, and you're a parent of a 10-year-old and you think that maybe they could benefit from it, go for it. No wrong answers about when you
Yes.
start playing music. Never too late, never too early. Well, it can be too early if you're too young, but it's the time when you're interested is the right time to get on it.
Perfect. Yes, absolutely. So switching gears to the business side of things a little bit, um, I often say a lot of good ideas or dreams like kind of die on living room couches and in garages and in basements and things like that. There's wanting to do something and then there's actually doing it. So for you as an entrepreneur, what kind of bridge the gap between wanting to do it and actually doing it? And what advice do you have for other people that might be in a similar situation?
Oh man, yeah, what a great question. That was a lot of my year this year in the early part was like,
Mm.
how do you, and still I feel like I'm in that phase, the transitional phase from kind of like one stage of life and one mode of working and being to another. Because the
Yes.
changes are not just work changes. You know what I mean? You're rearranging
Yes.
your life, you're reorienting yourself toward a different thing. I was fortunate in a couple ways. The primary way that I was fortunate is that my wife and business partner, Brandy, has a really sharp mind for business and for small business. She's a CPA and an accountant. She's worked with small businesses
Nice.
for a long time. Still does that. That's her job, her main job. And my background was in sort of like early on in kind of news reporting. I would still do like a magazine story once in a while, just to kind of to stay sharp on the side, and or like a longer writing project. And the way we first started talking about doing this was kind of serendipitous. I bumped into, actually it was a Groovin' on the Greenway, a little shout out for Waynesboro. Bumped into now a friend, but then a stranger, a guy named Kelvin, who he and his wife Tina are doing some great things in Waynesboro as well. They are renovating a building downtown. I think have some. We should talk to them at some point about their own plans. But we started talking, watching Groovin' on the Greenway, just about bands and bluegrass, and he had and music in general, and had some common punk bands we both liked, had some common bluegrass bands we both liked. Both had relatives that had kind of been in the professional bluegrass music orbit and knew what that lifestyle was like. And it didn't end up working out, but he was telling me a bit about plans for a building, and I thought, gosh, could you fit a music store inside of that? We always had kind of wanted to open one, and
Right.
it ended up not being the right opportunity, just by natural
Sure.
occurrence. Would have been super coincidental if it had been. But what it started us doing was being like, well, what would that look like for real? Not just as a thing we talk about ourselves, but what's the math of that? What's the lifestyle change?
Yes.
How
Yes.
does one become a person who owns a music store? I don't know. I had no idea. Um, so Brandy, my wife, knowing that I am not oriented like she is toward discovery via spreadsheet and data, like what you need to do is report this like it's a story. Like get your notebook out, go interview a bunch of people, go talk to people who have worked in this, find out what the steps are. Get to the point where if you were writing a story about it, you'd be ready to start writing. right?
Oh, yeah, great.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, I know how to do that. I can do that. Like made it a little bit of a more achievable kind of process for me. So
Gotcha.
I did that, actually reached out to some friends and people who had some experience. A store owner in Warrenton, Tim Dingus, who runs a great store over there called Drum and Strum. They've been there for decades, right? So
Yeah.
he knows how to run a successful business and how to and I'd worked for him as a teacher in his store when I was younger, and we lived in that area for a couple of years right out of college when my wife and I were living in Fauquier County. And then I talked to a friend, Emily, who had started and run the Front Porch in Charlottesville, which is a great
Okay.
meditation center with tons of people and a lot of people, just several people like that, right? Like, hey.
Yes.
Other people who had nothing to do with music, who had just made a mid-career shift and had
Mm.
gone from, hey, I did this for a while and now I did this other thing. And so also a lot of exploratory conversations with vendors, like guitar companies, like how many of your guitars should a person get to be a vendor with you, and like how do you work with a company like Taylor or with a guitar company. I started reaching out to different places, including some in the area. Hudson Dalton Guitars over in Stanton, they make great guitars. I'd met those guys writing a magazine story on them.
Nice.
So they were top of mind for me. They also, in addition to being local, like make like the best guitars, right? So
Right.
if they were somewhere else, they would be a good company to talk to too. Anyway, and so the early part of this year, really first quarter maybe, I wasn't planning to make that change, but we started to do a little kind of casual research on it just to see. I had worked at UVA at that point for about 15 years. Really liked it. Had a great career there in terms of how I experienced it.
Yeah.
Great coworkers, learned a ton. I worked in digital marketing and in communications. I was a social media director there. I was
Nice.
a content strategy director. I was a marketing director for one of the schools in continuing ed for like adult education. And it was a great, super good experience. I felt like I was about to like parachute out of a plane, but it was totally fine. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
plane was not crashing. It was, and I would say for the transition, there's a lot of different ways to do it. A lot of the advice we got was like, hey, go slow, start your business on a part-time basis and feed it and grow it. And I think that's totally valid. We did not do that. We kind of did like the let's build it up and then launch it. And I went ahead and left my job and to do it full time, to have the store be open full time. The part that made it, on the personal side, that made it possible to do that was some good planning ahead of time to kind of have
Yes.
those initial resources set aside, which I'd encourage people to do. If you're thinking about starting a business in downtown Waynesboro, you should go talk to Greg's office and Grow Waynesboro and learn about the
Yes.
resources that are available there, because they really do help you with potential challenges and with some resources you can take advantage of. I would say the city has been great in Waynesboro as we've started. But some of it too was like, in my digital marketing career, I knew that I had a skill set that I could freelance a bit. So I was able to start a second company to continue working in that area,
Nice.
and have some client relationships where I could not just completely cease being one thing on one day and be something different, but create an overlap period in which the store has a little bit less pressure on it, so that we could reinvest in it, as it grows, and
Right.
and then I could still be able to kind of lean on another skill set to make sure that the things that need to get taken care of are getting taken care of. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's been really nice. And I would say, despite all of that, which sounds very neat and orderly when I lay it out, it is terrifying to do all of these
Yes.
things, right? It is crazy feeling. And if somebody
Yes.
in that situation, we're only a few months in, it's October. It's one of those time warps, right? Where like sometimes you're like, what happened to 2012 to 2017? That felt like it was about
Yes.
6 minutes of time, right? Like total. And then I'll
Right.
think like, but how come August till now, when that store opens, feels like it's been about 6 years, right?
Yes.
Because of like the intensity of the stuff from my end, not for anybody else. But I would say if you're on the edge of something like that and you're thinking about it, you will never be totally satisfied that it's risk-free, because it will never be risk-free. There is
Right.
always this element of, man, I'm Wile E. Coyote out on the edge of the ledge, holding the anvil and still running in place. Like that's
Yes.
that's kind of how it feels sometimes. And if I just look down, I'm gonna, there we go.
Yeah.
But the other thing that is also true is that if you don't like start running, then you'll just stay right where you were, you know. And
Right.
so that sounds a little trite, maybe, but I may feel differently in a year or in 5 years. But thus far, I would say that all the hard work is really paying off. Just getting to talk to the musicians in the area. There are so
Mm.
many good musicians in Waynesboro and in the broader Stanton, Augusta kind of region. I mean, unbelievable amounts of musical talent around here. Every bit as deep of a tradition in some areas as other places in the state that are much more better known for
Yes.
producing like roots music, especially, but really any type of music. And so, I'll have, a young kid who's a bluegrass prodigy walk through the door and try a guitar, and I'm like, oh man, I'm never gonna play like that kid. Jeez.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes later, it'll be someone who will come through the door who's like, played Carnegie Hall on piano before, and
Yeah.
and just happens to live in the area, or just was looking for some accessory or something small.
Yes.
I think that the things we hear most often from customers when they come in are it's nice to have a place to go to get
Mm.
strings or cables or to play a couple different instruments if you're not sure exactly which one you want. Um,
Right.
I think we've heard from folks that when we have a jam, which we're trying to do every other week in the store, every other Saturday afternoon, or when we have events, we've had one kind of workshop for people to learn how to like set up and work on their own banjos to get them sounding really good, which is hard. It's like a piece of engineering, a banjo, right? A lot of control points on that thing. You have to learn how to work.
Yes.
And we've got another one coming up. I'm not sure when this episode will come out, but on October 21st, we'll have a bluegrass jam boot camp.
Oh, great.
By a great banjo player named Bill Evans, who just recently moved to the area, but is like a nationally known, like he's up in the top flight of music educators and players in this genre nationally. Uh,
Nice.
and just happens to live in the area now. So he's graciously offered to do this workshop in the store. So on the 21st, if somebody's interested in that, they can go to our Facebook page and find ticket information. But rewinding way back to the beginning part of our conversation, that event and that spirit of that event too, not just for this thing to come and go once, but in an ongoing way, is a really important kind of piece of connective tissue for people who maybe play some music, play guitar a
Yes.
bit, know some chords, but are like, I don't want to just roll in on a bluegrass jam. That's intimidating. That's a lot. Like, what do you even do
Yeah.
for the songs? When's it my turn? Like,
Right.
how come they're all, how come they're all shooting daggers over at that guy that brought in the actual literal wash tub bass? It's like those things, maybe not the wash tub bass question, but the rest of that are things that he would break down in that workshop, and it's meant to be
Okay.
a sort of like, hey, let's talk it out and let's make this participatory, and there's a no judgment zone, right? You're just going to come in and learn some of the stuff so that when you do go into that next sort of open jam, you can have some kind of confidence behind it.
Right.
But yeah, being able to grow a little bit of a community with their students and being able to grow a little bit of a community with the jam and have occasional events and reasons for people to come in. We're never going to be as big as like the Floyd Country Store, which is awesome. And Floyd,
Yes.
everybody has had a chance to go down there. We're a small store. But I very much want to offer a part of the same type of experience, which is that you are plugging into a bigger thing for a minute while you're there.
Awesome. Love that. And you offered such great advice for entrepreneurs. A lot of entrepreneurs I talk to, one thing that can be a challenge is feeling like you're in it alone. But like you said, like reaching out and connecting with people that have done what you want to do, is awesome. And then, um, like you said, we think like, oh, owning a business, there's like a singular destination, but there's a lot of roads, there's a lot of paths you can take to get there. You do not have to all of a sudden quit your job and like go in 100%. You can plan, like you
Yeah.
said, and it is, like you mentioned, not just a work change, it's like it's a life change.
Oh,
Um,
yes. And
yes,
that part's big. I mean, people, I
yes,
did not see all of that coming, even though it's obvious, right? But like, it's deep implications for your life, how you spend your day.
yes,
Especially I've been working from home, had all the great flexibility that you get with that, which you still work hard when you're working from home, but it means that when your kids get off the bus, maybe you're there, right? You wave at them as they walk
yes.
through the kitchen, and you don't have to worry about like, oh, I've got to be at such and such a place at such and such a time quite as much.
Right.
That part's been, that part's been an adjustment. But yeah, I think you hit it on the nail on the head that at least in my limited experience, like there is no exact blueprint to follow.
Right.
You're kind of piecing together as you go. For people my age, I think I'm big into metaphors, and I think one of the best metaphors for the experience of starting a business is like when you're playing Super Mario Brothers 3 on the original Nintendo, and you got to the dark level, which
Yeah.
there's a map that you moved around in that game, and you could always see where you're going the next step on the path, and you play each board, and then all of a sudden it just goes black, and you have no idea where you are. There's a little spotlight on you, but you can't see the whole map anymore.
Yes.
Like and you're like, should I go up? Should I go left? Should I go down? I don't know. But like starting a business is a bit like that. You're like, okay, so the map disappeared, and now
Yes.
I know where I am, but I don't know where anything else is. And I guess I'm going forward, but is this actually forward, or is there a pit? I don't know. We'll find out.
Right, right. That is really good. That's a really good way to
Yeah,
describe it.
that metaphor only applies if you were born between like 1975 and 1987 and have Nintendo and played Super Mario 3. So I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
So, why do you think Waynesboro specifically is such a good place to do business?
Oh man, because Waynesboro is on the come up, I think, and
Mm,
has some intrinsic advantages that other communities, I think, just can't ever have, right? Like we are located in one of the most physically beautiful places on the planet, right at the very base of the Blue Ridge on the South Fork of the Shenandoah River. We are, it is tremendously gorgeous. And I bet if you could put like microphones inside of the cars as they come westbound over the top of Interstate 64 and they like hit the Valley View for the first time, right? And you're heading
yes.
west and you're like coming up over and then you like look down and there's the whole valley right below you. You'd hear a lot of like, oh, man, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That sound, I think, is how people feel when they come into the valley sometimes. We sort of take it for granted, like growing up here and then moving somewhere else. I was like, where's all the mountains and rolling hills? And like, how come it's so flat? you know,
Yeah.
you kind of don't appreciate it, I think, until you get back. But aside from that, aside from the kind of like proximity of Shenandoah National Park and the Appalachian Trail and the outdoor abundance that we have here, we're also situated like, you know, right between Charlottesville and Stanton, right between Crozet and Stanton, right on the 64 corridor, right near the interchange with 81. Like there's a lot of, there's a lot of commercial activity moving through the region all the time. That doesn't necessarily apply always to like, the health of a region, but I think it sort of puts us on a main artery, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I would say with regard to Waynesboro itself, um, I'm no expert in this type of thing, but I think that there certainly are communities where you become a bedroom community for the town next door, or your underlying thing that you have there within your own borders is kind of not an appeal and drawing other people in. And I don't think that that's the case for Waynesboro. Or you have a community where maybe it grows really fast, but housing costs are like you're not unable to catch up with it, and I think we see this sometimes, not to editorialize too much, but with a town like Charlottesville, where a lot of people want to live and it kind of prices you out and you get pushed to the periphery. And Waynesboro, we've always had folks like that, right? Like I worked in Charlottesville and lived over here. It was in part for reasons that had nothing to do with, how just only housing, but it was also very
Sure.
much like, where we wanted to be and what's convenient for my wife and I for our commutes. But I think what's happening, at least in the 20 or so years that we've been living here, is you see, it's like a Goldilocks zone, right? Not too hot, not too cold. It's like it didn't explode with like out of control runaway influx of population growth and overflow from Charlottesville or Harrisonburg, kind of like creating a bubble that could burst. But we did
Right.
see kind of like steady growth and investment, and you see that happening all over the place if you look for it. Look at downtown. We've got more healthy businesses and restaurants downtown than at any time since I've lived here, I think. Some
Yes.
days if I forget my lunch at Waynesboro Music and I'm in the Colonnade right there behind the Wayne Theater, I'm like, man, do I call ahead to River Burger? Do I go over to Deli Up? Do I get a piece of pizza from down the road, one of those huge ones, right?
Yeah.
You know, you have all these like options, right? Like when did that happen?
Right.
And then more broadly, I think if you're downtown, you're really excited to see maybe some movement on some structures down there that have been empty for a long time that maybe are not going to
Yes.
be empty forever, which I think is just fantastic. And then you see the museum coming in, right? Like, Virginia's natural abundance is pretty considerable. You could put that museum anywhere in the state, and I think the fact that it's going to be, downtown in Waynesboro is going to be a big thing. So,
Yes.
I guess if I was going to try to distill that into something more coherent in response to the question, sort of why Waynesboro and what's going on there, I would say, number one, like, location, right? We're at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. We're at the foot of Shenandoah National Park. The Blue Ridge Parkway runs right nearby. We are on a major interstate with 64, but it doesn't run right through the middle of town. We are connected to, via short commute to more significant population centers, over in Charlottesville or in Harrisonburg, but we also kind of have our own sort of distinct identity. So, that stuff, like, you can't buy, right? Like,
Right.
that's just Waynesboro's natural advantages. And I think that they're ample. And then I think beyond that, there's a wax and wane to any community over long time scales. If you look at decades or, centuries, there's ups and downs. And I think that Waynesboro's had its ups and it's had some downs. And I think we're at the early part of an up right now. And
Yes.
that's what I hope happens over the next couple of years.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode. If people want to learn more about Waynesboro music, where can they find more information?
Yeah, our website will be up soon. There's a little bare bones site right now with a contact and our hours. That's at waynesboromusic.com. If you're trying to keep up with our our goings ons, you can get on our mailing list in the store, and you'll get a newsletter from us once every couple of weeks. Just come in, the sign-ups at the counter. If you're looking to play some guitars, just roll in and check it out.
Nice.
We're hoping to have more things for other musicians of different varieties over time. Right now, mostly guitars, banjos, mandolins, sheet music, strings, accessories, cables, all of that good stuff. But check in, and even if you're not after one of those things, just come in and say hi.
Awesome. Thank you so much. To everybody listening, make sure you go over to Waynesboro Music and check it out. Check out their events. Sounds like a very welcoming place for musicians of all levels or people interested in becoming a musician. For everybody watching, make sure you tune into more episodes of Waynesboro at Work. You can find us on your favorite podcast channels like Spotify. You can watch the episodes on the Visit Waynesboro YouTube channel. You can also learn more about Waynesboro businesses at growwaynesboro.com and waynesborobusiness.com. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next time.